I don't want to do too many more post-mortems. On Friday we had is it Asted Herndon on, and he had done a lot of reporting in his in the run up to the race. And the big thing I took away from that, his postmortem, was essentially that the value of a primary was not just on the candidate side. Like a primary would have helped a candidate get a sense of like, where should I be campaigning in the general? Is it really going to help me to be going around with Lynn Cheney? Or is it going to help me to go around and say, this time around, we're going to get Build Back Better, or explaining things about inflation, or whatever it is. There's value, obviously, to who ultimately becomes the candidate after a full-on primary, without a doubt. There's value, but the biggest value, I think, that hurt Harris, and obviously it wasn't her decision to not have a primary. And I'm not talking a 2-week primary, because a 2-week primary doesn't do any of those things.
Right. It
just ends up being sort of like, I don't know. I don't even know how you would, what the analogy would be in picking someone there. But what it also does is it begins to inform the public a little bit, like who's running. I think the number one search term on election day phrase was, did Joe Biden drop out of the race, or something to that effect? Could you look that up on Google Trends?
Yep.
Is Joe Biden the candidate? But beyond that, look at this. This gives you a sense of like, and it's hard to know exactly what we're talking about when we say news, right? What constitutes news? But this is from Data for Progress. This is a report where they show support for Harris decreases as news consumption decreases. All likely voters, and this was on between October 5th and November 3rd. Now, we'll probably have better data on this as, when we get 6 months out and there's voter files and you can look at this. But this is pretty fascinating.
It also tracks with other data that we've seen, like pretty identically.
Yep. Great deal of news attentiveness, 52 to 46% for Harris. A lot, 50 to 40%. A moderate amount, then it starts to flip, 46 to 49, a little, 42 to 49, and then none at all is 32 to 51%. And I would say that those last three cohorts, some of them in the bottom cohort, they go to sleep in 2020 in terms of like following the news. They don't care. And then they wake up 4 years later. They don't know who the candidate is or anything about her. And they just vote for this dude.
And Biden, and I'm so bummed I missed that conversation with Ested, because I had heard him elsewhere, and part of why we wanted to have him on was because I loved his analysis so much. Like, it also, Biden being in the race for this long and there being no primary decreased even like the low propensity voter or someone who doesn't pay much attention to media's interest in politics at all, because he was, one, not visible. There was a leadership vacuum because in the final year and a half, he could barely communicate. Let's be real about this. 2, because things weren't going so well. And 3, because like a primary is a way to increase attention on the party, the ideas that they're discussing. This stuff could
involve the public.
Involve the public, right? And that was the number one thing that Ested said that I just keep returning to is like, what the Democrats shut out the public entirely.
They tried to save democracy without any democracy.
And look at this.
And that's Biden's fault for staying in the race and the Democrats for not pushing him out. But yeah.
I mean, I actually don't think, I mean, look at, hold on one second. I don't actually think that people were like, they're pushing democracy and we haven't had any in choosing our nominee. I don't think anybody voted based upon that. I do think that the lack of a primary hurt in terms of like both helping the candidate, the eventual candidate, and articulating to voters not even involved in the Democratic Party as to like who's running, what's their positions, what's their pitch. I think the pitch that you used at the end was probably the wrong one, but nevertheless.
Right.
But look at this.
I know.
This is crazy. Go back 60 days. You don't have anybody like people like start to realize sometime in like late October. Wait a second. Is Biden not
In the
running
race.
again?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember having this metaphor in 2016 is like people that listen to this show are like getting like a 4K resolution of the news. Most people aren't like that. Most people have like
Most people don't even have a TV.
most people are like flipping in like occasionally to like an FM station.
Or to the debate, to these big one
Exactly,
moments,
and they
which
never
is
had
when her approval was the highest, and then you saw this kind of like the people that they still needed to grab had tuned out, and you can't, for the democracy point, you can't. This is past 90 days. Yeah.
I mean, that's just crazy.
Yeah. But you can't adequately or coherently articulate the importance of democracy without performing democracy yourself. You know, I think that's the problem. I really do, because it's not just democracy isn't just elections. It's also showing responsiveness to the public. And this was the case we were making when Biden had to drop out, which is like something like 81% of your base says you should drop out. And a majority of the country says you need to drop out. You know, responding to that is also democracy. And so, like, I'm so sick of these Biden defenders saying this is popularism. We're on the one most important thing where he was supposed to listen to the public. He didn't. And then then you have Morning Joe. They were talking about how Trump is Hitler and stuff and how he's so dangerous, which I agree. And then the next day they're like, we went down to have a serious discussion about our differences and we look forward to working with him. So, like,
put up this number 4.
If he's a threat to democracy, then none of their actions indicated that.
Here is what you also lose with a real primary. Again, you're not getting any of this with a 2-week primary or 4-week primary or whatever it was that people were imagining would happen. This is from Blueprint. 83% of voters who broke for Trump in the final days think Harris and Democrats support using taxpayer dollars to pay for transgender surgeries for undocumented immigrants in prison. 77% believe Democrats support allowed to minors to transition genders without informing parents. Now, there's an argument that both Harris and Trump supported taxpayer dollars for transgender surgeries for undocumented immigrants in prison. Well, no, not for undocumented immigrants. No. But nevertheless, the idea that these were on the forefront, allowing children under 18 to transition genders without informing their parents, 77%. Decriminalizing border crossings. First of all, decriminalizing border crossings has been the norm prior to COVID, prior to Trump.
Wow. Democrats should have articulated that. Yeah. Right.
Allowing abortion up until the day of birth. That is not a position articulated by Democrats, although in Colorado, fortunately, it is. Allowing illegal immigrants convicted of crimes to stay in America. Barack Obama couldn't have deported more folks like that. Instituting a ban on fracking. Again, I would love one, but the fact of the matter is Kamala Harris was not in favor of a ban on fracking. And now, 4 years ago, maybe she had said it. Requiring all Americans to use single-payer Medicare for all healthcare system. I only wish Democrats were supportive of this. Defunding the police. Again, legalizing marijuana. I think it's up there, but I don't think it's 72.
Although that is something she supports. Supported.
The swing voters choose Harris believed it. The numbers are much, much lower.
So
these are all people who went to Trump.
The population we need to care about, though, swing voters, in the last few days of it? Like, how many people does this say?
Oh, I would imagine it's small, but let's be clear. 90%, if not more, of the people on both of these sides of voting, 90% are already locked in. And you see that the way that this, this swings for Trump voters in those last days. Those people are gettable, but really when you're also looking at, although the numbers are starting to come in, that there wasn't as many stay-at-home voters as we saw on the early days. It's narrowing. And it's certainly, in the swing states, it's not the case. Now, I don't know in terms of demographics, like in terms of actual sheer numbers, what percentages of registered voters of that cohort came. But in terms of raw numbers, I think she overperformed Biden in some of these swing state things. It's just that he
overperformed
2020 as well.
But like some of this is just, I think it tells two things. One, I think it says like all the liberal policies that the Republicans hit the Democrats on, they assigned to her and they attached to her, which I think is in some ways just her identity as a black woman, and she's being from California. But the big story here is that the Democrats failed in their messaging to counteract any of this because I think in part of this lack of primary, where Ested made this point. If there was a process by which these issues could have been debated, it would have been more clear what the Democrats even stood for. The problem is that there was a messaging and leadership vacuum where there was no counter narrative to some of this stuff. And that's because Biden stayed in the race without doing any campaigning really until the mid-summer, if not later summer, right? He dropped out at the end of July. So she had 107 days to change the narrative, and they also didn't do anything except run a centrist campaign, which
I think the problem is that starting at the convention and through the convention and until election day, it was all like lay low and and attract like Republican swing voters, and again, the people who are swing voters, they're just untethered from politics, broadly speaking. So it's not a question of policy. It's a question of like a large, sort of like reaching them and giving them a narrative in which they can believe about a candidate. And I definitely think there is no doubt in my mind, all of the gendered campaigning by the Trump people, whether it was talking about transgenderism, it is all
Rogan.
To trigger lizard brain. She's a woman. I mean, I think like you definitely run at you're definitely going uphill in the United States because you're black. But I think the women stuff impacts like not even I don't want a woman in office, although I'm sure there's some of that. But I also think part of it is like, I don't believe her on anything because she just doesn't have the gravitas.
It's exactly right. It's the tuning out. It's like I inherently believe him because of how authoritative he is, but I don't trust something about her. These are subtle things that people won't admit to, and then they'll say something different in polling. But like, there's Ested pointed this out. I mean, the Biden administration set her up to fail in ways that are misogynistic and racist from his end. But the overall problem with the Democratic Party is like bigger than this too, which is that we let a gerontocracy run this party into the ground. We have now allowed.
How did we end up with Biden in the first place?
Right. I mean, even we can go all the way back to Clinton. We can go back to Obama and his role in the 2020 primary. But even more broadly than that, we've been in major constitutional crises now, specifically too, because of elderly liberals clinging to power and there being no mechanism, whether it be Ruth Bader Ginsburg and now Biden, there being no mechanism to get rid of them. And like, And so he handed off his, centrist white guy campaign over to her with 107 days, and she overperformed given that set of circumstances. So but like overall, the problem is that the party didn't value having input from the outside because they were more interested in maintaining the legacy of an 81-year-old guy because of all the friends he has in Washington or whatever.
Well, I think it was Jill Biden. Now, I will also say someone made this point in the IMs that the State of the Union did calm a lot of concern. He did perform well in that State of the Union.
I've always said that was slightly overstated, though. Like, I think he was fine, but I think that was coming from a place where you expected him to be basically dead.
That was,
his
yes.
approval
There
rating
were
was
low
still
expectations,
shit.
and there was certainly...
They didn't believe the approval ratings. He said, there was this old clip of him from, his interview with, I think, Stephanopoulos right before he dropped out. He says, those are not my numbers. He was consistently under 40%
yes.
since the Afghanistan withdrawal.
Yes, and he was completely in denial about that.
And isn't Donilon, isn't it?
But,
Good.
well, I think maybe Martin O'Malley, could have run the same campaign as Harris in those same circumstances and won. Maybe.
Right.
Maybe just by, and I say Martin O'Malley because I'm just thinking of like the blandest white guy, just sort of generic white guy. They did fail to use their assets like walls and the weirdness and all that by not deploying that stuff. They had no answer to the Republicans saying that you're just running a campaign to make sure that all our kids are transgender. The response for that is, you guys are weird for keep bringing this up. Like you're making this out as if this is some type of forced imposition on people, and it's really just live and let live. And you guys are weird. And it's weird for you to do that. That would have inhibited the ability of the Trump people to do that stuff.
And when J.D. Vance's, this is the underreported story of this race, is that J.D. Vance's approval rating kept going up in October after that VP debate.
Yes, because he looked like a normal guy, and Walsh should have come out the door and said, "You're weird, dude. Like, you're talking about this stuff. It's weird." He should have been going on the offensive, but they didn't want to offend Republican voters. That's what they were told to do. And really, I think fundamentally, this was not a question of ideology as a first order thing. It is a question of competence. And the incompetence, however, I would say, is bred by an ideological positioning, because you don't empower consultants who come in whose number one job is to monetize the election unless they come from a cohort of people who ideologically are of that neo-liberal ilk. You just don't. And this was a question of competence, it seems to me, that you don't bring in people like, like Axelrod. He wasn't brought in as far as I know.
Pluff.
But Pluff. But you don't bring in these people who are saying like our answer is Rahm Emanuel, which is insane.
He wants to be DNC chair, by the way.
That's what I'm saying. Rahm Emanuel as DNC chair. You don't get people like this. They're not brought in by people who have a different set of politics. The cues are all there. And so it's first order incompetence that's driven by their complete desire to monetize. Look at the money that they blew through because there was an attitude of we're just going to pay, we're going to throw money at this problem. Compare it to Gallego, who runs in Arizona, and he was going on trips that other people have said complete waste of time. When you apply a Robert McNamara or a McKinsey consulting calculus to this stuff, this is what happens.
I mean, Romney said, or not Romney, Rom said not to invest in Walz because he couldn't win in that district, and Walz won it because Walz couldn't make a.
Back
not
in the
because he
day,
couldn't win, because he couldn't fundraise
Right,
a lot.
right. He
In,
couldn't
2000,
fundraise.
in
Right.
2006,
In
right?
2006 as a congressman.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it. Where you perceive money to be the end all be all, and what that can buy you is problematic. It's what sunk Hillary Clinton, where she thought, like, we don't need volunteers. We don't need enthusiasm on the ground. We can use modeling
Yeah.
to find out where our voters are. And it failed incredibly. So I don't think like all the talk of like what she should have run on or not should have run on or what she believe, like she completely ran on virtually nothing. It was muddled. You had billionaires out there, and you had Liz
It was incoherent.
Cheney out there.
Billions of media.
But the problem is that the campaign was just like, let's pump out all this stuff and do the earned media without actually having to have it be about what our policies are. And that, I think, is like, you get that from consultant class.
And
You
it's
get
in their
that from-
class interest not to change course, even when we've seen over and over again, because they work backwards
Well,
from
business is great right
it's,
now.
But
That's
it's doing
the thing.
But it's doing everything except changing the economy in a way that would work for people. And so they reach those conclusions in different ways, but it always ends up where they need to be.
I don't even know if there's a class consciousness amongst those people as much as it is like, we're just all in this to protect each other's ability to make money.
Yeah.
Like this is like, every lesson I've learned about anything was played out at Air America. And you had guys in there, all of the consultants, all the radio people who were brought in. Job number one for them was to protect their job, either today or tomorrow. And that meant, like at one point, we had an offer from a young, from the people who ultimately ended up running Obama's digital campaign, but from some of those people, early on, years before Obama ran, where they were like, we have this theory that we can send out mailers, because in radio you send out mailers.
Yeah.
We have this theory that we can send mailers instead of like just sending out 500,000 mailers to 500,000 random people. We can send those 500,000 mailers to people who read the Nation magazine. I'm making this up, but read the Nation magazine, belong to a co-op, have donated to Greenpeace or whatever it is.
Hyper-target people.
We
right.
can hyper-target this because we now have the ability to crunch this type of data. And we will provide these services, these targeting services, free because we want to try this out. Like, we think we can do this. We think it's going to benefit you. And we brought this to the Air America executive. And this dude came from radio. And even though substantially less expensive than who he could go with before, who he'd done with before, who did all the Hot 96, sweepstakes, they went with the Hot 96 sweepstakes. They sent out these mailers, cost, I don't know, $500,000 to $1 million, completely burnt. And our ratings went down the following thing. And it was just a perfect example of like any rational person could sit down and go like, wait a second, this makes a lot of sense. People's relationship with this product is different than it is with Hot 97. If they get the Nielsen book, even if they don't listen, they're going to know this is aligned and they're going to put it down. And it was a great idea to impact our ratings. But because this guy came from a different ideological mindset, did not understand the relationship between the audience and the radio station, did not understand the sort of like this dynamic, and only thought, I got to give this dude money because if I lose this job, I need my friends in the industry to basically be like, you did me a favor, I'm going to do you a favor.
Yeah.
You should hire Bill McKenzie. He's available now, and he really knows how to market. And that's basically what we're looking at with the Democratic, sort of
Consulting class.
consulting class and political class.
Yeah.
They want to win, but
on their terms.
But
Yeah.
they want to make sure that they keep the gravy train running.
But the one thing I just would say is, like, they didn't do that hyper targeting in the way of, like, they did the stuff that we didn't like, that we said Hillary didn't go to Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania. Like, they blanketed the swing states, right? So it's about more, I think, than that, in the sense of the hyper targeting of people that already listen to read The Nation or whatever that air America.
No. I'm just using that as a metaphor.
I know.
for the tools that they had that they could not understand because of where they were ideologically.
But it fits with this, given the graph that we start before we went off on this. I don't know. We've been talking about this for like a half hour, but like the graph that we showed first about media consumption is like, the Democrats weren't operating or sending out their message in a way. I don't even know what could have changed. But the voters that decided for Trump late, right? Like, I return to what I was saying about the McDonald's thing. Is he went and he did that stunt, basically, where he showed up in the McDonald's apron and handed out fries. But so the Democrats are telling everybody in this one media class of people that consume news frequently or every day that Trump is this big threat to democracy. But for people that are less engaged, he's like, he's going to McDonald's and like being funny and glad handing. He's going to UFC and he's going on Joe Rogan. He's going on Aiden Ross. Like, it's almost the
irony is this time around.
This is the Tea Party. This is the look. They're looking at the wrong. They're not looking at the broader public, and that was the problem with their over focus on the Never Trump Republicans. It narrowed them in a way that they couldn't recover from.
100%. And the irony is that this time around the media did not play Trump's rallies, and I think like that would have hurt him this time around. Everybody was fighting the last war. Here is Pramila Jayapal on MSNBC this weekend, and I love Michael Steele's like sort of meek response here, where he realizes like, oh, I'm part of the problem.
Republicans. I would just say to people who think we should be Republican light on a whole bunch of things that at the end of the day, if you could have the real thing or you could have a light version, what would you pick? You'd probably pick the real thing if you were oriented in that way.
I get the regular Coke every time.
And you would lose all of the people that are actually part of the Democratic base or could be a part of the Democratic base. I've been saying this for a long time. And when I look at the numbers, that is what I see. It isn't just this election. It goes back. I just went back to 2012. We are increasingly losing working people and poor people in this country because we're not delivering for them on the things that matter.
But aren't they moving to the right?
Well, they are, but that's because they feel like the system is broken. And Leader Jeffries did a great job of describing this the other day in a press conference that I saw. They feel that the system is broken. And they're right. They're right. Housing is too expensive. The price of stuff in the grocery stores, too high. Their kids can't afford homes. I mean, the idea of even having a down payment for a home, I'm sorry, people can't afford the rent.
This is true. It's too expensive.
It's too expensive. And that's not just in Seattle or Los Angeles. That is everywhere. Opioids on the streets, really ravaging communities. And so they feel like, listen, you guys said you were the party for the working class. It's not working. And by the way, big money campaigning with Republicans and with billionaires, once again, does impact how people think about what the contrast is. So if you're a working class person who has just felt like your life is getting worse and worse and worse, you might just say, listen, I've been with this party the whole time. I'm going to throw it in. And I'm going to try to go for the guy who's going to blow up the system. So I think there's a lot in here. It's not just one election. I don't think that we can just blame the candidate who had 104 days to get this done. I think we really have to be willing to look deeper at what has been happening over time. Why didn't we raise the minimum wage when we could? We haven't raised the minimum wage. Minimum wage is passing on the ballot in Trump states. Paid sick leave is passing. 3 states. Paid sick leave passing on the ballot in Trump states. And we've been saying this for some time. people will turn against other people, whether it's immigrants, whether it's whomever, when their own situation is not good.
And I want to make something else clear here. Steele tries to make it like people, they're turning to the right. No, they're not turning to the right. They are turning to the only other option, because if it's not working one way, they think it's going to work the other way.
Maybe we do need to deport everybody.
And it's not. I mean, I don't even think that they think that. I think they're just like,
well,
I pressed this button before.
Yeah.
And didn't get what I wanted. So I'm going to press this button. I don't even think that there's like, well, it's a function of deport. I think it's just like, I tried, vanilla last time. I didn't like it. It didn't agree with me. I've never liked chocolate, but I'm going to try it because maybe it's better. I mean, it's like literally, I think it's that type of decision for a lot of people.
I think it is their explicit like labor policy, and the Democrats have just delivered for bankers. I'm sorry, like who has been delivered for Obama? Like it's Elon Musk and Mark Cuban and the entire like Rust Belt, like that thing of 2016 when Schumer's like, we're going to lose working class in Pennsylvania and gain in this suburbs. Before that, he said, things are so bad with trade right now that we might get all the senators in the Rust Belt. Well, Trump ran that election and the Republicans ran that election. The complacency among Democrats and the amount of effort that I'm having to and people that I respect, like I like Dean Baker's work. Why he keeps insisting that people were just misled by the media to think that the economy was better than it was. I'd try to rent a place. I don't know what world people are living in that they think the economy people were bamboozled into thinking the economy was bad. I know what class they're in though.
It's a complete, the numbers that are being used to measure the economy by these folks are, it's a higher class or a professional managerial class
PMC.
Or capitalist, right? Metrics. Also, by the way, why do I get a crap what Steele's conclusion is from this? The former head of the RNC, and of course that's what he takes away from what Jayapal articulated exactly what the Democrats need to be. I hope she continues to be the chair of the Progressive Caucus if this is the takeaway from what this election was, because that means good things. That
was the message right there.
And she did a great job of saying it there. Even, without all of the other things that we talk about, there are a bunch of reasons why Kamala Harris in particular lost, but it doesn't take, and we shouldn't be discounting of things like racism and misogyny and all that went into it. And I'm definitely not. But the overall problem with the party is what we need to take away from it, because that's how we move forward. Not just doing autopsies. It's about lessons learned.
And this is funny because Cole from Michigan just said, feels like an hour ago when Sam said he's tired of most post-mortems. I don't think it works like there's a lesson learned. The only value to post-mortems at this point is to push favored ideological responses and to stop, from my perspective, to stop people like, really DNC chair is like going to be one of like the only sort of relevant things for the next couple of, years, to stop a Rahm Emanuel. That's the only value to the postmortems. I don't think there's any lessons learned. I think it's really ultimately, if anything's going to change within the context of the Democratic Party, it's going to be, the model is more like what we saw when Sanders ran in 2016. And I am convinced the reason why Sanders did so well in 2016, better than he ever possibly anticipated. Again, he did not think that he was running to win until like January or February of 2016. He had no idea he had a chance to win. The reason why is because there was a movement to draft Elizabeth Warren in the Democratic Party. Regardless of where you are on the Warren spectrum, the point is people began to organize around issues like medical bankruptcy, 99%, et cetera, et cetera. She was one of the first maybe the first senator to come out in support of Occupy. And people started to organize around that. In the sheer power of that organization, I think like Bernie added to it significantly, but he had a basis on day one that I don't think he fully understood that he had. And that to me is the only thing. There is no, well, I've been thinking about this and, I'm Rahm Emanuel and I'm convinced by the arguments that, in fact, Harris would have won if she had done the weird thing and let Tim Walz talk about what he had done. That's not going to happen. That doesn't happen. This is, I don't know if that happens in any context, but it certainly doesn't happen with the party. It comes down to, are you going to build a movement that is going to be a player in the next sort of like whatever it is, 2022, 2026 elections or 2028 elections.
This just returned to my, because I was going to say this earlier, but like Trump even defied my expectations of like, he couldn't possibly win this way, right? Like he was even more base oriented, giving them everything they wanted.
Bringing out low propensity voters.
But even like, the laziness of the campaign, but just the most absurdly racist, misogynistic rhetoric, plus the anger and the bullying and the smashing of things. Like he was even more untethered than he was in 2016, unless I'm whitewashing it in my brain. And it worked because you know why? He turned out his base.
Yeah.
And the Democrats have tried to kick their base in the teeth since I've been sentient and been able to identify this kind of stuff in politics. And so they are always trying to win by disciplining their base as opposed to rewarding their base. And this model has come up against reality, a brick wall of reality. And there has to be a course correction. And Jayapal says there that Hakeem Jeffries agrees with her. Let's hope that that's the case, because if not, and Rahm Emanuel and that kind of cadre wins the day, we're in deep shit, even more deep shit than we're in right now.
And I would just observe that if Harris won even very narrowly, all the people that are saying she was too woke to win and that's why she lost will be saying she ran a great centrist campaign and that's why we need to jettison the left.
100%. That's the thing. It's all this post-mortem stuff is bullshit. At the end of the day, no one's learning any lesson. It's really about what in the near term is the spin going to impact in terms of decisions that the party's going to make. And that only decision at this point is who's going to be DNC chair. And that is going to be a decision that is going to be fought in sort of like the conventional think spaces, and we can influence that. But in terms of of real change, it's going to come from the exact sort of same thing as both the electoral outcomes we want are going to be impacted by just sort of the broader political changes that we want, which is, organization and movement building. And, I don't know if people organize around Sean Fain as some type of surrogate, and then whoever feels most comfortable coming in and, picking up that baton, politically, it's there. So, we have to create the movement so that somebody can step in and channel it, at least in terms of that electoral stance, but also as a way of getting political power if somebody gets in who is at least susceptible to being influenced by people on, from the center left. All right, we're going to take one phone call just because I feel so bad. An hour ago, I said no post-mortems, but honestly, I am sick of it. And now we've purged it. Sometimes these things have to pass, like a kidney stone. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.